The Revolution of the Dialectic by Samael Aun Weor. The Dominion of the Mind. It is clear that we are to become more and more independent from the mind each time. The mind is certainly a cell, a prison where we are all prisoners. We need to evade that prison if we really want to know what liberty is, that liberty which does not belong to time, that liberty which is not of the mind. Before all else, we should consider the mind as something that is not of the being. Unfortunately, quite identified with the mind, people say, "I am thinking," and they feel themselves being the mind. There are schools that dedicate themselves to the fortification of the mind. They give courses by correspondence, they teach how to develop mental power, etc., but all of that is absurd. It is not the fortification of the bars of the prison which we are in that is indicated. What we need is to destroy those bars in order to know true liberty, which, as I have already said, is not of time. As long as we are in the prison of the intellect, we will not be capable of experiencing true liberty. The mind, in itself, is a very painful prison. No one has been happy with the mind. To date, the first man who is happy with the mind has not been known. The mind makes all creatures unhappy. The happiest moments that we have all had in life have always been in the absence of the mind. They have been for an instant, yes, but which we will not be able to forget in our lifetime. During such a second, we have known what happiness is, but the latter has only lasted for a second. The mind does know what happiness is. It is a prison. We need to learn how to dominate the mind, not others' minds, but one's own mind, if we want to become independent of it. It becomes indispensable to learn to see the mind as something that we should dominate, as something that, we can say, we need to tame. Let us remember the Divine Master Jesus entering Jerusalem on his donkey on Palm Sunday. That donkey is the mind which we need to subdue. We should ride the donkey, and not have the donkey ride us. Unfortunately, people are victims of the mind since they do not know how to ride the donkey. The mind is a donkey that is too clumsy, which we need to dominate if we truly want to ride it. During meditation, we should converse with the mind. If a doubt crosses the mind, we should dissect the doubt. When a doubt has been properly studied, when it has been dissected, it does not leave any trace whatsoever in the memory, it disappears. But when a doubt persists, when we want to incessantly combat it, then a conflict is formed. Every doubt is an obstacle for meditation. But it is not by rejecting doubts that we are going to eliminate them. Rather, it is by dissecting them to see what they hide, that is real. Any doubt which persists in the mind becomes an impediment for meditation. Therefore, we need to analyze, tear to pieces, reduce the doubt to dust, not by fighting it, but by opening it up with the scalpel of self-criticism, by carrying out a rigorous, implacable dissection on it. It is only in this manner that we will come to discover what was important in the doubt, what was real and what was unreal in the doubt. Therefore, doubts sometimes serve to clarify concepts. When one eliminates a doubt through rigorous analysis, when one dissects it, one discovers a truth. From such truth something more profound comes, more knowledge, more wisdom. Wisdom is elaborated on the basis of direct experience, on our own experimenting, on the basis of profound meditation. There are times, I repeat, that we need to converse with the mind, because many times, when we want the mind to be still, when we want the mind to be in silence, it persists in its stubbornness, in its useless chattering, in the struggle of the antitheses. Therefore, it is necessary to interrogate the mind, to say to it, "Well, mind, what is it that you want? Well, answer me." If the meditation is profound, a representation can emerge within us. In that representation, in that figure, in that image, is the answer. We should then converse with the mind, and it sees the reality of things, until we make it realize that its answer is erroneous. Make it realize that its preoccupations are useless and the reason why they are useless. And in the end, the mind remains still, in silence. But if we notice that illumination does not emerge yet, that the chaotic state, the incoherent confusion with its struggle and incessant chattering still persists within us, then we have to call the mind to order once again, interrogate it. What is it that you want? What are you looking for? Why do you not leave me in peace? One needs to speak clearly and converse with the mind as if it was a strange individual, for certainly it is a stranger, because it is not of the being. We need to treat it like a strange subject, we need to recriminate it and scold it. The students of advanced Zen are used to the practice of judo, but their psychological judo has not been comprehended by the tourists who arrive in Japan. To see, for example, the monks practicing judo, struggling with one another, it would appear to be a mere physical exercise, but it is not. When they are practicing judo, they are really hardly noticing the physical body, their struggle is really directed at dominating their own mind. The judo in which they are engaged is against each of their own minds. Therefore, the psychological judo has as objective to subdue the mind, to treat it scientifically, technically, with the object of subduing it. Unfortunately, Westerners see the shell of judo. Of course, as always, superficial and foolish, they took judo as a personal defense and forgot the principles of Zen and Chan, and that has been truly lamentable. It is something similar to what happened with the tarot. It is known that of ancient wisdom is in the tarot, that all cosmic laws and of nature are in the tarot. For example, an individual who speaks against sexual magic is talking against the 9th arcane of the tarot, and is therefore throwing a horrible karma upon himself. An individual who speaks in favor of the dogma of evolution is breaking the 10th arcane of the tarot, and so on, successively. The tarot is the measuring rod of everyone. As I said it in my book titled The Mystery of the Golden Blossom, in which I end up saying that authors are free to write what they please. But they are not to forget the measuring rod which the tarot, the golden book is, if they do not want to violate the cosmic laws and fall under the law of Katansia, which is superior karma. After this short digression, I wish to say that the tarot that is so sacred, so knowledgeable, has become a poker game among the different card games that there are to entertain people. People forgot its laws, its principles. The sacred pools of the ancient temples, of the mystery temples, have today become pools for swimmers. The art of bullfighting, the profound science, taurine science of the ancient mysteries of Neptune in Atlantis, lost its principles, has today become the vulgar bull circus. So then, it is not strange that the Zen Chan Judo, which precisely has as objective to subdue one's own mind in each of its movements and stops, has degenerated, has lost its principles in the Western world and has become nothing more than something profane which is only used today for personal defense. Let us look at the psychological aspect of judo. Right now, I do not mean to say that I am going to teach you physical judo, for I myself do not practice it, but I am teaching you a psychological judo. One needs to dominate the mind has to obey. We need to recriminate it firmly in order for it to obey. How is it possible that while we are in the practice of meditation, in instance in which we seek stillness and silence, that the mind imposes itself, does not want to be still? We need to know why it does not want to be still. We need to interrogate it, recriminate it, whip it, make it obey. It is a stubborn, clumsy donkey which we have to dominate. Krishnamurti has not taught this, neither has Zen or Chan taught it. This that I am teaching belongs to the second jewel of the yellow dragon, to the second jewel of wisdom. Within the first jewel we can include Zen. But Zen has not explained the second jewel, even when it has the introduction in its psychological judo. The second jewel implies the discipline of the mind, dominating, whipping, scolding it. The mind is an unbearable donkey that we need to tame. Therefore, we need to count on several factors during meditation if we wish to attain the stillness and silence of the mind. We need to study the disorder because it is only in this manner that we can establish order. We need to know what, in us, is attentive, and what, in us, is inattentive. Always, when we enter meditation, our mind is divided into two parts, the part which pays attention, the attentive part, and the inattentive part. It is not on the attentive part that we need to focus attention, but rather, it is precisely on what is inattentive in us. When we enter into meditation, our mind is always divided into two parts, the part that pays attention and the part that does not pay attention. It is not to the attentive part that we have to pay attention, but precisely to what is inattentive in us. When we are able to comprehend in depth what is inattentive in us and study the procedures so that the inattentive becomes attentive, we will have achieved the stillness and silence of the mind. But we have to be wise in meditation, judge ourselves, know what is inattentive in us. We need to make ourselves conscious of that which is inattentive that exists in us. When I say that we should dominate the mind, the one who has to dominate the mind is the essence, the conscience. By awakening consciousness, we have more power over the mind and thereby, we become conscious of what is unconscious in us. It is urgent and undelayable to dominate the mind, converse with it, recriminate it. Beat it with the whip of willpower and make it obey. This belongs to the second jewel of the yellow dragon. My real being, Samael Aun Weor, was reincarnated in ancient China and I was called Cho-Li. I was initiated into the order of the yellow dragon. I have orders to deliver the 7 jewels of the yellow dragon to whoever awakens consciousness by living the revolution of the dialectic and by achieving integral revolution. Before all else, we should not become identified with the mind if we truly wish to take the most advantage of the second jewel, because if we feel ourselves being the mind, if I say, I am reasoning, I am thinking, then I am affirming an absurdity and I am not in agreement with the doctrine of the yellow dragon, because the being does not need to think, because the being does not need to reason. The one who reasons is the mind. The being is the being, and the reason of the being is being itself. He is, what has always been and what will always be. The being is the life which throbs in each atom just as it throbs in each Sunday. What thinks is not the being, what reasons is not the being. We do not have the entire being incarnated, but we have incarnated a part of the being which is the essence or Buddhata, that part of soul which exists in us, the spiritual, the psychic material. It is necessary for this living essence to impose itself over the mind. What analyzes in us are the egos, because the egos are but mere forms of the mind, mental forms that we have to disintegrate and reduce to cosmic dust. Let us study something very special in these moments. There could also be the case of someone that dissolves the I, eliminates them. It could also be the case that someone, besides having dissolved the I, fabricates a mental body, because the mental body itself, no matter how perfect it may be, also reasons, also thinks, and the most elevated form of thinking is non-thinking. As long as one thinks, one is not in the most elevated form of thinking. The being does not need to think. He is what has always been and what will always be. Therefore, in synthesis, we need to subdue the mind and interrogate it. We do not need to subdue other people's minds because that is black magic. We do not need to dominate the mind of anyone because that is witchcraft of the worst type. What we need is to subdue our own mind and dominate it. During meditation, I repeat, there are 2 parts, that which is attentive and that which is inattentive. We need to become conscious of what is inattentive in us. Upon becoming conscious, we can evince that the inattentive has many factors. Doubt. There are many doubts. Many are the doubts which exist in the human mind. Where do those doubts come from? We see, for example, atheism, materialism, mysticism. If we tear them apart, we see that there are many forms of atheism, many forms of materialism. There are persons who say that they are materialistic atheists, and yet they fear spells, witchcraft. They respect nature, but in their own way. When one talks to them about spiritual or religious matters, they declare themselves materialistic atheists. Their atheism is nothing more than an incipient form. There is another type of materialism and atheism, the incredulous, skeptical, Marxist-Leninist type. Behind it all, there is something that materialistic atheist is seeking. He simply wants to disappear, to not exist, to annihilate himself integrally. He does not want to know anything about the divine monad, he hates it. Obviously, upon proceeding in this manner, he will disintegrate as he wishes. That is his choice. He will cease to exist, he will descend to the infernal worlds, towards the center of gravity of the planet. That is his choice, to self-destruct. He will perish, but in the end, he does continue, the essence will liberate itself, will return to new evolutions and will go through new involutions. He will return again and again in different cycles of manifestations to fall into the same skepticism and materialism. In the end, the result will appear. What result? On the day when all the doors definitely close, when the 3,000 cycles come to an end, then that essence will be absorbed in the monad, and the latter will in turn enter the universal spiritual bosom of life, but without mastery. What is it that that essence really wants? What does it look for in its atheism? What are its aspirations? Its aspirations are to reject mastery. Behind it all, that is what it wants, what it gets. It does not value it, and it finally ends up as a divine spark, but without mastery. The forms of skepticism are varied. There are people that call themselves Catholic, Apostolic, and Romanic. However, in their expositions they are crudely materialistic and atheists, but they go to Mass every Sunday. Go for communion and confess their sins. This is another form of skepticism. If we analyze all the forms that have been and are to be of skepticism and materialism, we discover that there is not a soul skepticism, there is not a soul materialism. The reality is that there are millions of forms of skepticism and of materialism, millions because simply they are mental, things of the mind. That is, skepticism and materialism are of the mind and not of the being. When someone has gone beyond the mind, he has made himself conscious of the truth, which is not of time. Obviously, it cannot be materialist nor atheist. He who has at some time listened to the verb is beyond time, beyond the mind. Atheism is of the mind, belongs to the mind that is like a fan. All the forms of materialism and atheism are so many and so varied that they resemble a great fan. What there is that is real is beyond the mind. The atheist and materialist are ignorant, they have never listened to the verb. They have never known the divine word, they have never entered the current of sound. In the mind is where atheism and materialism are gestated. These are forms of the mind, illusory forms that do not have any reality. What is truly real does not belong to the mind. What is certainly real is beyond the mind. To become independent of the mind is important so as to know what is real, not to know it intellectually, but to and truly experience it. On paying attention to what is inattentive, we can see different forms of skepticism, of incredulity, of doubt, etc. Since seeing any doubt of any type, we have to tear to pieces, submit it to dissection to see what it truly wants. Once we have torn it to pieces totally, doubt disappears without leaving any mark in the mind, without leaving in the memory not even the most insignificant trace. When we observe what is inattentive in us, we also see the struggle of the antitheses in the mind. It is at this point when we have to tear apart those antitheses to see what they have that is true. One should also dissect memories, emotions, desires, and preoccupations which are ignored, which one does not know where they come from or why they come. When we wisely see that there is a need to call the attention of the mind, there is a critical point where one has gotten tired of the mind that does not want to obey in any manner, then there is no choice but to recriminate it, speak to it forcefully, deal with it face to face, as with a strange and inopportune subject. One has to lash it with the whip of willpower, recriminate it with harsh words until one makes it obey. One has to converse many times with the mind so that it will understand. If it does riot understand, then one has to severely call it to order. To not identify with the mind is indispensable. One has to whip the mind, subjugating it, dominating it, since it will be violent, and we again whip it. In this manner we come out of the mind and arrive at truth, that which is certainly not of time. When we manage to reach that which is not of time, we can experience an element that radically transforms. There exists a certain transforming element that is not of time, that can only be experienced, I repeat, when we come out of the mind, that is when we feel this transforming element. One has to struggle intensely until one achieves the intimate self-realization of the being. We need to become independent of the mind over and over again and enter the current of sound, the world of music, in the world where the word of the Elohim resounds, where truth certainly reigns. While we are bottled up in the mind, what can we know of the truth? What others say. But what do we know? The important thing is not what others say, but what we experience for ourselves. Our problem is in how to get out of the mind. For this, we need science, wisdom to emancipate us, and this is found in gnosis. When we think that the mind is quiet, When we believe that it is in silence, however, no divine experience comes to us, it is because the mind is not quiet nor silent. Deep down, it continues struggling. Deep down, it is conversing. Then, through meditation, we have to confront it, converse with it, recriminate it, and ask it what it is that it wants. Tell it, "Mind, why aren't you quiet? Why do you leave me alone?" The mind will give some answer, and we will answer it with another explanation trying to convince it, and if it does not want to be convinced, there will be no other remedy but to subjugate it through recrimination and the whip of willpower. The dominion of the mind goes beyond the struggle of the opposites. In this manner, for example, a thought of hatred, an evil memory assaults us. Well, then one has to try to comprehend it, try to see its antithesis, which is love. If there is love, why is there hatred? With what objective? There surges forth, for example, the memory of a lustful act. Then one has to pass through the mind the sacred chalice and the sacred lance. One has to say, "Why do I have to profane the sacred with my morbid thoughts?" If the memory of a tall person surges forth, one should see him short, and this would be correct since in the key is synthesis. Knowing how to always find the synthesis is beneficial because from the thesis one has to pass on to the antithesis, but the truth is not found in the antithesis nor in the thesis. In the thesis and in the antithesis, there is discussion, and that is what is really wanted: affirmation, negation, discussion, and solution. Affirmation of a bad thought, negation of the same through comprehension of the opposite, discussion. One has to discuss what is real from one and the other until one arrives at wisdom and leaves the mind quiet and in silence. This is how one should practice. All of this is part of conscious practices, of the observation of what is inattentive. But if we simply say, "It is the memory of a tall person," and we put a short person in front of it, period, it is not correct. What is correct would be saying tall and short. So, they are nothing but two aspects of the same thing. What matters is not what is tall or short, but what there is of truth behind all of this. Tall and short are two illusory phenomena of the mind. In this way one arrives at the synthesis and at the solution. The inattentive is what is formed by the subconscious, by the incoherent, by the amount of memories that surge forth in the mind, by the memories of the past that assault one now and again, by the debris of the memory, etc. The elements which constitute the subconscious should neither be accepted nor rejected, but simply, one has to make oneself conscious of what there is inattentive, and to this manner what is inattentive becomes attentive in a natural and spontaneous manner. What is inattentive becomes attentive. One has to make of daily life a continuous meditation. Meditation is not only that action of quieting the mind when we are at home or in the sanctuary, but it can also encompass the thread of daily living so that life immediately becomes a constant meditation. The mind in itself is the ego. But it is urgent to destroy the ego in order for the mental substance to remain with which the mental body can be fabricated. The mental body can be fabricated, but one will still have the mind. What is important is to liberate oneself from the mind, become free of it. Being free of it to learn to function in the world of pure spirit without mind. To learn to live in that current of sound that is beyond the mind and is not time. Ignorance is what there is in the mind. The real wisdom is not in the mind. It is beyond the mind. The mind is ignorant, and because of this falls into so many grave errors. How foolish are those who do mentalist propaganda, those who promise mental powers, those who teach others how to dominate other persons' minds, etc. The mind has not made anyone happy. True happiness is very much beyond the mind. One cannot come to know happiness until one has become independent of the mind. Dreams belong to the unconscious. When one awakens consciousness, he leaves behind dreams. Dreams are nothing but projections of the mind. I remember a certain case that I lived in the superior worlds. It was only an instant of carelessness. I saw how a dream came out of my mind. I was about to start dreaming, and I reacted in the dream that had escaped me for 1 second, but since I became aware of the process, I quickly walked away from that petrified form that escaped from my own mind. Suppose I had been asleep? I would have stayed there, beautifully entangled in that mental form. When one awakens, one immediately knows that in a moment of inattention, a dream can escape and one remains entangled all night until daylight. What is important in us is to awaken consciousness to stop dreaming, to stop thinking. This thinking, which is cosmic matter, is the mind. Even the astral itself is nothing but the crystallization of mental matter, and the physical world is also condensed mind. In this manner, the mind is matter and is very gross, whether it be in a physical state or in a state called astral manasic, as the Hindus say. In any case, the mind is gross and material, both in the astral as well as in the physical. Mind is physical or metaphysical matter, but it is matter. Therefore, it cannot make us happy. To know authentic happiness, true wisdom, we should get out of the mind and live in the world of the being. That is what is important. We do not deny the creating power of the mind. It is clear that all that exists is condensed mind. But what do we gain with this? Has the mind perhaps given us happiness? We can do marvels with the mind, create for ourselves many things in life. The great inventions are condensed mind. But these types of creations have not made us happy. What we need is to become independent, to come out of that dungeon of matter, because the mind is matter. We have to come out of matter, live in the role of spirits, as beings, as happy creatures beyond matter. Matter does not make anyone happy. Matter is always gross, although it assumes beautiful forms. It is always painful, if what we seek is happiness. If we are looking for authentic happiness, we will not find it in matter but in the spirit. We need to free ourselves of the mind. True happiness comes to us when we come out of the dungeon of the mind. We do not deny that the mind can be the creator of many things, of inventions, of marvels and of prodigious things, but does that give us happiness? Which of us is happy? If one of you is happy, well, let him raise his hand. I would like to meet him. If the mind has not given us happiness, we have to come out of the mind, find happiness somewhere else, and obviously we will find it in the world of the spirit. But what we need to know is how to evade the mind, how to free ourselves of the mind. That is the objective of our exercises and studies that I have delivered in the Gnostic books and in this treatise of the revolution of the dialectic. In us exists, for example, 3% of consciousness and 97% of subconscious. That is true. So what we have of consciousness should direct itself to what we have of unconscious or subconscious to recriminate it and make it see that it has to become conscious. But there is a need for the conscious part to recriminate the subconscious part, so that the subconscious becomes conscious. This matter of the conscious part directing itself to the subconscious part is a very important exercise that can be practiced at dawn, so that in this manner the unconscious parts become conscious, little by little. Probationism. Probationism is the science that studies the mental essences which imprison the soul. Probationism is the science of esoteric tests. Probationism is that internal wisdom which permits us to study the prisons of the mind. Probationism is the pure science which permits us to know in depth the errors of individual minds. The human mind should liberate itself from fear and cravings. The human mind should liberate itself from the desires of accumulation, from attachments, hatreds, egotism, violence, etc. The human mind should liberate itself from the reasoning processes that divide the mind in the battle of the antithesis. A mind divided by the depressing process of options cannot serve as an instrument to the inner cell. We have to learn to exchange the reasoning process for the beauty of comprehension. The process of conceptual election divides the mind and gives birth to erred action and to useless effort. Desire and cravings are obstacles for the mind. Those obstacles lead man to all types of errors, the result of which is karma. Fear exercises over the mind the desire for security. The desire for security enslaves the will, converting it into a prisoner of definitive self-barriers, within which all human miseries hide. Fear brings all types of inferiority complexes. Fear of death causes men to arm themselves and assassinate one another. The man who carries a revolver at his waist is a coward, a fearful man. The brave man does not carry weapons because he does not fear anyone. The fear of life, the fear of death, the fear of hunger, the fear of misery, the fear of cold and nakedness, engender all types of inferiority complexes. Fear leads men to violence, hatred, exploitation, etc. The mind of men live from one prison to another, and each prison is a school, a religion, an aired concept, a prejudice, a desire, an opinion, etc. The human mind should learn to flow seriously, in an integral manner, without the painful process of reasoning which divides it with the battle of the antithesis. The mind should become like a child in order for it to be able to serve as an instrument to the inner self. We should always live in the present because life is only an eternal instant. We should liberate ourselves from all types of preconceptions and desires. We should move only under the impulses of the inner self. Covetousness, anger, lust have their den in the mind. Covetousness, anger, lust lead souls to the avicii. Man is not the mind. The mind is merely one of the four bodies of sin. When man becomes identified with the mind, he goes into the abyss. The mind is merely a donkey upon which we should ride in order to enter the celestial Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. When the mind besieges us with useless representations, let us talk to it in this manner. Mind, remove these representations. I do not accept them from you. You are my slave, and I am your Lord. When the mind besieges us with representations of hatred, fear, anger, cravings, covetousness, lust, etc., let us talk to it in this manner. Mind, remove these things from me. I do not accept them from you. I am your master, I am your Lord, and you should obey me because you are my slave until the end of time. Now, we need men of Thelema, men of will who do not let themselves be enslaved by the mind. Chapter 4. The Intellect. One should become conscious of what one studies by means of spontaneous meditation, otherwise, it destroys the intellect. One needs to practice undivided, integral meditation at the hour when one feels like doing so. Meditation should not be mechanical. We need to attain the mathematical equilibrium between the being and knowledge. 20 plus 20 is equal to 40. 40 minus 20 is equal to 20. The intellectual only sees things through his theories. There are two types of intellect, the commonly known sensual intellect and the intellect which is given by the being, and which is a conscious intellect. There are degrees in the objective reason of the being, and they are measured according to the number of tridents on the horns of Lucifer. When one opens the inner mind, one does not need to verbalize theories, hypotheses, and preconceptions. Subjective science is that of those who are enclosed in the sensual mind and of those who live in assumptions. See Chapter 12 of The Great Rebellion by the same author. Pure science is only within the reach of those who have the inner mind and of those who unfold among triangles, octagons, and squares. Intelligence. One should not confuse intelligence with the mind. In every mind there is a certain sum of intelligent values. We do not need to look for the intelligent values outside of ourselves, the latter are within ourselves. The intelligent values of every human being do not change and neither do they become exhausted. The reserve of intelligence is a constant. When a positive value appears, it is, in fact, received happily by the intelligence. We need a new revolutionary pedagogy whose only objective is to make us conscious of what we already know. Identification, values, and image. To identify oneself, to imagine oneself, and to value oneself exactly is undelayable when we want to make an inventory of ourselves. Enlightened intellection. Whoever managed to disintegrate the cadavers of the ego obtain enlightened intellection. Enlightened intellection is the intellect placed at the service of the spirit. Jesus, the Christ, had enlightened intellection. He placed his intellect at the service of the spirit. The great error of materialists consists, precisely, in believing that the great reality needs physical phenomena, but their reality, after all, is a product of the materialistic intellect arid not of enlightened intellection. Both the physical as well as the spiritual are energy, and because of this, the spirit is as real as matter. Matter is as sacred as spirit. As long as the materialistic intellect does not become enlightened intellection through the revolution of the dialectic, it will not be possible to comprehend that the material and the spiritual behave in a correlated and dialectical manner. Time. Time is life. Whoever does not depend on time controls life. The flow of existence presents itself in too short duration to allow it to transpire in trifles. The brevity of life is sufficient reason to encourage us to make it greater with the integral revolution. With intelligence, we should take advantage of vital time to the maximum, in order for it to prolong its shortness. Let us not make it smaller with the clumsy and mean actions of the ego. Chapter 5. Comprehension. In that world, that of comprehension, everything is abstract and apparently incoherent. This incoherence is when the first steps are taken in the world of comprehension. The mind and the psychological universe are in a great chaos, and that is why there is no concatenation of ideas, sentiments, etc. In the 49 levels of the subconscious, there is a great quantity of files with powerful information, but, unfortunately, they are in disorder and anarchy. When one works in the world of comprehension, images and words emerge in the form of koans. In the first works on the comprehension of defects, the assistance of sleepiness becomes necessary. In this comprehensive action one reaches confused levels, where images do not have coherence and where color does not yet possess clarity. In other words, they do not possess much sparkle. One of the principal obstacles in the comprehension of a defect is not being able to focus on the psychological element being studied, because the mind tends towards distraction. In the world of comprehension, when one tries to work on an eye, everything becomes dark, one cannot see absolutely anything, and the consciousness loses, at certain moments, its lucidity, rapidly falling into fascination. The current of thoughts and sentiments is an obstacle to arrive at comprehending a defect. Upon wanting to comprehend an eye, we fall into a dark void, into a type of amnesia in which we do not know what we are doing, who we are and where we are. The force of Eros and the creative energy are the most perfect helpers for comprehension. The creative energy, transmuted or sublimated during sexual magic without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen, opens the 49 levels of the subconscious, causing all the I which we have hidden to come out of them. These psychic aggregates emerge in the form of drama, comedy, movie, and through symbols and parables. It is written that the clue of comprehension is found in these three psychological keys: imagination, inspiration, and intuition. Imagination. For the sage, to imagine is to see. The imagination is the translucence of the soul. In order to achieve the imagination, one needs to learn to concentrate the mind on a single object. Whoever learns to concentrate the mind on a single object performs marvels and prodigies. The Gnostic who wishes to reach imaginative knowledge should learn to concentrate and know how to meditate. The Gnostic should provoke sleepiness during the practice of meditation. Meditation should be correct. The mind should be exact. One needs logical thought and exact concept so that the internal senses will develop absolutely perfectly. The Gnostic needs much patience because any act of impatience leads him to failure. On the path of the revolution of the dialectic, one needs patience, will, and absolutely conscious faith. One day, in one's sleep, a faraway picture, a scene, a face, a number, a symbol, etc. emerges during meditation. This is the sign that one is already progressing. The Gnostic rises towards imaginative knowledge little by little. The Gnostic lifts the veil of Isis little by little. Whoever awakens consciousness has reached imaginative knowledge and moves around in a world of symbolic images. Those symbols that he saw when he dreamt, when he tried to comprehend the go during meditation, now he sees them without dreaming. Before he saw them with a sleep consciousness, now he moves around among them with the consciousness of the vigil state even when his body is profoundly asleep. Inspiration. Upon reaching imaginative knowledge, the Gnostic sees the symbols but does not understand them. He comprehends that all of nature and the ego are a living writing that he does not know. He then needs to rise to inspired knowledge in order to interpret the sacred symbols of nature and the abstract language of the ego. Inspired knowledge confers upon us the power of interpreting the symbols of nature and the confused language of the ego. The interpretation of symbols is very delicate. Symbols should be analyzed coldly, without superstition, malice, distrust, pride, vanity, fanaticism, prejudices, preconceptions, hatred, envy, covetousness, jealousy, etc. Since all those factors are of the I. When the I intervenes, translating and interpreting symbols, it then alters the meaning of the secret writing and of the orientation which the being wants to give us symbolically about our inner psychological state. The interpretation should be tremendously analytical, highly scientific, and essentially mystical. One has to learn to interpret in the absence of the loose cathexis, the ego, the myself. One has to learn to interpret the symbols of nature and those of the bound cathexis, the being, in the absolute absence of the I. However, one should multiply self-criticism, because when the I of the Gnostic believes he knows much, he then feels himself as being infallible and wise, and even supposes that he sees and interprets in the absence of the I. We have to know how to interpret basing ourselves on the law of philosophical analogies, on the law of correspondences, and on the numerical Kabbalah. We recommend the mystical Kabbalah of Dion Fortune and my book titled Tarot and Kabbalah. Study them. Whoever has hatreds, resentments, jealousies, envies, pride, etc. will not achieve the elevation of himself to inspired knowledge. When we rise to inspired knowledge, we understand and comprehend that the accidental accumulation of objects does not exist. Really, all the psychological phenomena of nature and of all objects are found intimately linked organically among themselves, some internally depending upon others and conditioning themselves mutually among themselves. Really, no psychological phenomenon of nature can be comprehended integrally if we consider it in an isolated manner. Everything is in incessant motion, everything changes, nothing is still. In every object, internal struggle exists. The object is positive and negative at the same time. The quantitative is transformed into qualitative. Inspired knowledge permits us to know the interrelationship between what has been, what is, and what shall be. Matter is nothing more but condensed energy. The infinite modifications of energy are absolutely unknown both to historical materialism as well as to dialectical materialism. Energy is equal to mass multiplied by the square of the velocity of light. We, Gnostics, withdraw from the antithetical struggle which exists between metaphysics and dialectical materialism. Those are the two poles of ignorance, the two antitheses of error. We walk on another path, we are Gnostics, we consider life as a whole. The object is a point in space which serves as a vehicle to specific sums of values. Inspired knowledge permits us to study the intimate relationship existent between all forms, all psychological values and nature. Dialectic materialism does not know the values, it only studies the object. Metaphysics does not know the values and neither does it know the object. We, Gnostics, withdraw from the two antitheses of ignorance and we study man and nature integrally, seeking integral revolution. The Gnostic who wants to reach inspired knowledge should concentrate profoundly on music. The magic flute of Mozart, which reminds us of an Egyptian initiation, the 9 symphonies of Beethoven and many other great classical compositions, among them, Wagner's Parsifal will elevate us to inspired knowledge. Profoundly concentrated on the music, the Gnostic should become absorbed in it like the bee in the honey, the product of all his work. When the Gnostic has reached inspired knowledge, he should then prepare himself for intuitive knowledge. Intuition. The world of intuitions is the world of mathematics. The Gnostic who wants to rise to the world of intuition should be a mathematician, or at least, have notions of arithmetic. Mathematical formulae confer intuitive knowledge. The formulae of Kepler and of Newton can serve to exercise ourselves in the development of intuitive knowledge. If the Gnostic practices with tenacity and supreme patience, his own internal being, bound cathexis, will teach him and instruct him in the great work. Then, he will study at the feet of the Master. He will elevate himself to intuitive knowledge. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition are the 3 obligatory steps of the revolution of the dialectic. Whoever has followed the 3 steps of direct knowledge has achieved supraconsciousness. In the world of intuition, we only find omniscience. The world of intuition is the world of the being, it is the world of the inner self. In that world, the I, the ego, the loose cathexis cannot enter. The world of intuition is the world of the universal spirit of life. Human problems. The astute and repugnant Luciferian intellect creates problems, but it is not capable of resolving them. There are many theories which resolve nothing and complicate everything. The vital problems of existence continue as usual, and the world is very close to the Third World War. The intellectual animal, falsely called man, feels proud of his subjective and miserable reasoning which resolves nothing and complicates everything. In practice, the tremendous battle of the mind has demonstrated to be the least indicated one to resolve problems. What does abound a great deal in this era of world crisis are the know-it-alls who want to resolve everything and resolve nothing. The know-it-alls harm the fruits of the soil with their absurd hybrids, they infect children with their vaccines of tuberculosis, poliomyelitis, typhoid, etc. The know-it-alls know everything and know nothing. They cause harm with everything that they have created and they boast of being knowledgeable. The mind creates problems which it is not capable of resolving, that is a game of bad taste. Today, like yesterday, the poor human biped is nothing more than a mechanical toy moved by forces it ignores. Any cosmic event, any sidereal catastrophe, produces waves of a certain type that, upon being picked up by the unhappy animal called man, become world wars. Millions of human machines who unconsciously launch themselves to the stupid task of destroying so many other millions of human machines. The comic and the tragic always go together, and the comical thing of this case are the flags and the mottos and all kinds of phrases which were invented by all of those unconscious machines. They say that they are going to war to defend democracy, freedom, the country, etc. The great thinkers. The prostitutes of the intelligence, known in the world as journalists. Ignore that these wars are the result of certain cosmic waves in action and that the armies in the battlefield move like automatic puppets under the dynamic impulse of those unknown forces. No fundamental problem has been resolved by the minds of these poor intellectual animals. The intellect is the faculty which allows us to comprehend that everything is incomprehensible. The great intellectuals have totally failed, as is being demonstrated to satiety by the catastrophic state which we are in. Mr. Intellectuals, there you have your world, the chaotic and miserable world that you have created with your theories. The facts are speaking, you proud intellectuals have failed. The battle of the mind is gone in its inner nature. We need a new faculty which is not egocentric. We need the battle to pass and for the mind to remain still and serene. This is only possible by comprehending in depth the entire mechanism of the subjective and miserable mind. In the serenity of the mind, a new faculty is born in us. The name of said faculty is intuition. Only intuition can resolve problems. It is obvious that if we want to develop this new faculty, we first need to comprehend in depth that complicated associative mechanism of the subjective mind. The basic center of the reasoning mechanics is the psychological I. Said center is egotistical and because of that it can never resolve problems. Intuition has nothing to do with that basic center of reasoning. Intuition is Christ-centric. Every problem has been created by the mind and exists as long as the mind sustains it. Every problem is a mental form which the mind sustains. Every mental form has a triple process: emergence, subsistence, and dissipation. Every problem emerges, subsists, and then dissipates. The problem emerges because the mind creates it. It subsists as long as the mind does not forget it, and it dissipates or dissolves when the mind forgets it. When the mind ceases, beatitude and later illumination is born in us. Before arriving at illumination, we should first pass through beatitude. The phases of transformation are 3: non-thinking, beatitude, and illumination. Intuition is illumination. Every enlightened person resolves the most difficult problems. Really, problems cease to exist when we forget them. We should not try to resolve problems, we should dissolve them. They dissolve when they are forgotten. The problem is an ultrasensible mental form with two poles, one positive and the other negative. Do not have fear, forget the problem. And in this manner, the problem will be dissolved. Do you know how to play chess? A game of chess would not be a bad idea to forget the problem. Or drink a cup of coffee or a good cup of tea and then go to the swimming pool. And swim or climb a mountain and laugh a little. It feels good to laugh, and this causes you to forget the problem. At any moment, a hunch comes, and the problem is resolved. Perhaps the solution is not to your liking, but the truth is that the problem is resolved, or better said, dissolved. A sage said, "Take care of the thing before it comes into existence, therein lies the solution." For let us not forget that the problem has been born and has its existence in the mind. It is raining and you have left your umbrella at home. That is not a problem in itself, neither is the fact that you have debts, that you have lost your job and it is urgent for you to pay, a problem. These facts are relatively true in a relative world, but problems are something that you, therefore, should kill before they are born or solve later, bearing in mind that the more time we allow to elapse, the greater the giant that we will have to overcome will be. Fear is our worst enemy. The demon of fear does not like us to resolve problems. Are you afraid that you will be thrown out on the street because of not having money to pay the house rent? And if they throw you out? So what? Do you by any chance know what new doors shall open for you? Intuition knows it, and that is why the intuitive is not afraid. Intuition dissolves problems. Are you afraid of losing your job? And if you lose it, so what? Do you by any chance know what new job there will be for you? Intuition knows it, and that is why the intuitive is not afraid. When the battle of the mind ends, intuition is born and fear ends. Intuition dissolves problems no matter how difficult they are. Chapter 6. A Bet with the Devil. Napoleon would have succumbed against the devil. One thing is to be in the battlefield against other males, and another is the fight against oneself. Satan is a golden enemy, and he is very useful. The devil is a ladder to descend, and it is also a ladder to ascend. The 12 labors of Hercules are with the devil. The pact with the devil is the bet itself, and the triumph is the capacity of fabricating gold. The electric force is the cross in movement, or the swastika. It is continuous movement. The transcendent electricity, which turns like a vortex, has served me to form the Gnostic movement. The cross in the profane and the profaners is not a swastika, because once the chemical copulation ends, the movement ends. On the other hand, in the Gnostic cross, the movement does not end because the electricity continues transmuting itself. The norm in the sexual work should be a minimum of 1 hour. In India, the degree of culture is measured according to the time that the chemical copulation is carried out. The one who lasts 3 hours is respected and is a lord. The swastika in movement generates transcendent sexual electricity. Hitler knew about these things, and that is why he took the swastika as the symbol of his party. The man of green gloves belonged to the clan of Dag Dupas. Hitler let himself be dazzled by this man, and he was taught to crystallize everything. When von Litz capitulated, the monks in Lhasa of the Dag Dupas launched themselves to the streets celebrating the capitulation of Berlin. The Second World War was a duel between the teachings of Gurdjieff and that of the Dag Dupas. This duel was imported from Tibet, and it was a true struggle between the white and black magicians of Tibet. Sexual super-dynamics. It would be useless to possess all the erudition of this world if one were not to die in oneself. The destruction of the psychic aggregates is only possible in the forge of the Cyclops, in full chemical coitus. Man and woman, sexually united, are surrounded by terrible cosmic forces. Man and woman, sexually united, are enveloped by the powerful forces which brought the universe into existence. Man is the positive force, the woman is the negative force. The neutral force reconciles both. If the three forces are directed against a psychic aggregate, the latter is reduced to cosmic dust. Man, in full chemical coitus, should help his wife by taking her psychic aggregates as if they were his own. The woman should also take the psychological aggregates of the man as if they were hers. In this manner, the positive, negative, and neutral forces, properly united, will be directed against any aggregate. This is the key of sexual superdynamics to disintegrate the psychic aggregates. Man and woman, sexually united, should pray asking Devi Kundalini to disintegrate such and such a psychic aggregate, which has been previously comprehended in depth. If the man wants to disintegrate a psychic aggregate, whether it be of hatred, lust, jealousy, etc., he will clamor to the Divine Mother Kundalini imploring her to disintegrate such an aggregate, and his wife will help him with the same supplication, as if the aggregate were hers. The man will also proceed in this manner with the psychic aggregates of the woman, taking them as his own. The totality of the forces of the man and the woman, during the metaphysical copulation, should be directed, whether towards the psychic aggregates of the man, or towards those of the woman. In this manner we will put an end to the ego. This is the key of sexual superdynamics, the connection of the lingam yoni, without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen, directing the three forces against each psychic aggregate. Let us not forget that during the chemical coitus, the man and woman united, are truly an omnipotent and terrible divine androgyny. The Mercury. The one who possesses the Mercury of the sages will attain the final liberation. It would not be possible to achieve the philosopher's stone if one does not first of all get to know oneself. The preparation of the Mercury is usually difficult. The Mercury results from the transformation of the exohairy or rough Mercury. The rough Mercury represents the sacred sperm. Many are the minerals which become Mercury, but not all minerals can become the latter. The preparation of the Mercury is similar to the assimilation of food. The dry Mercury, the countertransference, the ego, should be eliminated if we truly want a clean and pure Mercury for the great work. 20 is the mathematical differential mean of two quantities. If the dry Mercury is not eliminated, the differential mean cannot exist. We have to psychologically go through the phases of earth, water, air, and fire. Through the elimination and psychological comprehension of the dry Mercury, one attains the refinement of the sacrament of Rome. The interior igneous rose, impregnated with sulfur, fire, ascends gloriously through the spinal canal, giving us comprehension or light in order to comprehend the mechanisms of the ego. The Mercury transforms one into a knight of life and death. The universal Mercury exists. The cosmocrators had to work in the forge of the Cyclops sex at the beginning of the Mahamanvantara. This is not comprehended by the followers of Hegel's Dialectic of Nature. In the chaos, the mineral in the rough state, the army of the word, the couples, work to disintegrate the dry Mercury. Lu, the ancient moon earth, much dry Mercury had to be eliminated. In the revolution of the dialectic, in integral revolution, one has to do on a small scale what the logos did on a large scale. The human beings who do the great work are inwardly very different from a humanoid, although radical differences are not seen externally due to the former having eliminated the dry Mercury from themselves. The pure and clean excess of the Mercury forms a superior octave in the different existential bodies. For such an effect, one has to work in the laboratory of the third logos. In order to objectively understand the revolution of the dialectic, one needs the donum Dei. In other words, the gift of God. There exists no tomorrow for the personality of the disembodied. The personality is a form of the dry Mercury in which we waste much energy, the energy that we should utilize to fortify and carry out in us the transference of consciousness. A strong individuality totally replaces the personality, which is a grotesque form of the dry Mercury. The energy which we spend in the personality should be utilized to eliminate everything that does not belong to the being. Such is the case of the negative customs, which are also forms of dry Mercury. By disintegrating the dry Mercury, through sexual superdynamics and self-respect, we will become accustomed, therefore, to live in an impersonal manner. Chapter 7. Fundamental Education. I will never become tired of emphasizing that the academic and educational systems of these degenerated times are only useful to adulterate the authentic values of the being. Facts have come to demonstrate that I am right. Each school year, approximately 500 West German children will commit suicide, according to the statistics of previous years. It is estimated that 14,000 adolescents will try to take their lives, and a high number of them, 1 out of every 3 students under 16 years of age, will have severe symptoms of tension caused by what the Germans denominate as Schulangst, which means acute scholar anxiety. The pressures and tensions of school, which some children find that they cannot combat, are responsible for one of the most serious situations which the youth face. Schulangst seems to be one more social phenomenon. The result of a highly competitive school system, not only in Germany but also in all the countries of the world, mixed with high unemployment and a hierarchic society which worships foolish academic diplomas as a ticket to obtain highly remunerated jobs and a status symbol. The number of school-aged children who go through this type of anxiety feel that the systems of tension are unbearable. According to a study carried out by Karl Strittmatter, a professor of educational science, 1 out of every 3 boys under 16 years of age suffer chronic stomach problems, wet their beds while sleeping, or suffer severe headaches. 1 out of every 5 students are under psychiatric treatment, and it has been found that even children 9 years old suffer ulcers due to school tension. The interesting thing of the case are the statistics on school suicide, especially discouraging due to the age of the victims. Of the 517 students under 18 years of age who committed suicide in Germany in 1976, 103 were between 10 and 15 years of age. The level of suicide among young people under 18 years of age is approximately 3.3 in every 100,000 in West Germany, 50% higher than in the United States, where suicide among adolescents is also an alarming problem. As long as one does not work with a fundamental education based on the solid principles of a free initiative, non-imitation, creative liberty, conscious attention, value, love, how to think, knowing how to listen, wisdom, generosity, comprehension, integration, simplicity, peace, veracity, intelligence, vocation, etc., explained in my book Fundamental Education, not only children and adolescents, but adults as well, will continue in acute anxiety and in the monstrous increase of the suicide rate. The press. All newspapers are filled with ideas which in reality falsify the mind. In this path of psychological liberation, it is not convenient to falsify the mind. It seems to me that in order for there to be true mental health, one needs conscious faith. The press fills the mind with skepticism, and the latter alters the equilibrium of the mind, because it makes it ill. Journalists are 100% skeptical by nature. Mental health is not possible as long as conscious faith does not exist. The skepticism of journalists is contagious and destroys the mind. Children, instead of reading foolishness, should be taken to the countryside and fairy tales of olden times narrated to them. In this manner, their mind will remain open and free of prejudices of these decadent and degenerated times. In these decrepit and mechanical times, it is necessary to recover the capacity of amazement. Unfortunately, modern people have lost this capacity. Television. What is important in life is to not fill the mind with foreign ideas that are seen on television, since with time they become effigies. The images that are seen on television are reproduced in the mind, transforming themselves into representations that take up psychological reality. It is necessary to have the mind clean so that the being can officiate in our psychological universe, free of the shackles of the ego. Those who search for the integral revolution can see useful movies that are related to nature so that they can obtain objective benefits for the superlative consciousness of the being. Ultramodern music. Modern music does not have harmony nor authentic melody, and it lacks precise rhythm as well. I consider modern music to be inharmonious, with a type of strident sounds which is harmful for all the 5 cylinders of the human machine. Music of an ultramodern type harms the nervous system and alters all the organs of the human physiology. Modern music does not keep concordance with the melodies of the infinite. If the ego is destroyed, one will vibrate with the cosmic music and with that of the world of the spheres. Romantic music is related with the things of time and is illusory. Classical music leads us to the communion with the ineffable which is not of time and is the eternal. Solio Enensius. The great Russian scientist George Lakhovsky, after having profoundly studied the sunspots, arrived at the discovery that an intimate relationship exists between them and wars. In this era of remote-controlled rockets, profound studies have been made on cosmic rays and their influences on the living cell and organisms in general. The complex mechanism of remote-controlled rockets can be controlled by means of radioactive waves. Neither the radioactivity of the planets in space, nor their electromagnetic influence upon living organisms can be denied any longer. A cosmic law called Solioenensius exists, which has manifested itself on our planet Earth 40 times after the submersion of Atlantis. Such a cosmic law results from the electromagnetic tension of the worlds. Solar system of Ors has a neighboring system called Pleiudo. There also exists in the cosmos the famous comet Salni, which sometimes draws dangerously close to the resplendent Pleiudo. Such a resplendent sun has many times seen itself forced to develop a strong magnetic tension in order to be able to firmly maintain its customary cosmic path. This tension, as is natural and logical, provokes identical tension in all the neighboring suns, among which is our sun called Ors. When our sun Ors puts itself in electromagnetic tension so that the cosmic path it follows is not modified, it originates identical tension on all the planets of the solar system of Ors, including our planet Earth. This is the cosmic Solioenensius, the great law which acts on our Earth at very long intervals. Normally, this great law produces intense religiosity and profound yearning for inner self-realization, but when humanity is not psychologically prepared for the action of this law, the result is customarily catastrophic. In the year 1917, the aforementioned cosmic law manifested itself intensely, but since the Russian proletariat was full of profound resentments and bitterness, Solioenensius was combined in an abnormal and negative manner with the psyche of each individual. The result of that negative combination was the Bolshevik Revolution. It had already been a while that Russia had been preparing itself psychologically for this bloody revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution was certainly the result of an extremely bad combination of Solioenensius with the psychological idiosyncrasy of each individual. One of the characteristics of this law in action is the yearning for freedom. However, there were in Russia, during that time of the Bolshevik Revolution, a few persons who were able to intelligently take advantage of Solioenensius to develop objective reason, individual self-consciousness, and the revolution of the dialectic which will also emerge during these times. Many years have passed, and we do not yet know when Solioenensius will return. What we do know is that we should prepare ourselves psychologically to receive it in an intelligent manner and achieve, with the help of the same, the integral revolution that I propose in an objective manner in this treatise. It is but logical to think that if Solioenensius finds us without psychological preparation, the result has to be a catastrophe. It is good to record in our memory, and to never forget, that the Bolshevik Revolution and the War of 7 Days were really a social catastrophe. We should aspire to carry out on the earth the revolution of the dialectic, and that is why it is necessary to prepare ourselves psychologically, as best as possible. It would be lamentable for the next Solioenensius to find us without any type of psychological preparation. In the past, each time that Solioenensius manifested itself, it was catastrophic when humanity was not prepared. Let us remember ancient Egypt. Between one dynasty and another there were terrible events. Twice did Solioenensius manifest itself in a catastrophic manner in the sunny land of Kem. In the first one, the people, in a bloody revolution, elected rulers through blood and death. The candidates who had in his sacred vase the greatest number of eyes, belonging to the legitimately constituted ruling class, would be elected as a new ruler. It is clear that the scenes of such a revolt were horrible. In the second manifestation of this cosmic law, the Egyptian people, infuriated, rose against their rulers and killed them by piercing them from side to side with a sacred metallic cable. On that occasion, neither sex nor age was respected, and that cable seemed more like a macabre necklace, which was later dragged by beasts and thrown into the Nile. Solioenensius produces yearnings for liberation, revolution of consciousness, but when the human being is not prepared, it only occurs to him to kill the rulers, to assassinate. Others dethrone kings, cause wars, etc. We should prepare ourselves psychologically for Solioenensius. We need to become self-conscious and carry out upon the face of the earth the revolution of the dialectic. Religious principles. All religions are precious stones strung on the golden thread of the divinity. Religions conserve the eternal values. False religions do not exist. All religions are necessary. All religions fulfill their mission in life. It is absurd to say that the neighbor's religion is useless and that only ours is authentic. If the neighbor's religion is not good, then neither is mine good, because the values are always the same. It is stupid to say that the religion of the indigenous tribes of America is idolatry. Therefore, they also have the right to say that our religion is idolatry. And if we laugh at them, they can also laugh at us. And if we say that they adore or adored idols, then they can also say that we adore idols. We cannot discredit the religion of others without discrediting ours also, because the principles are always the same. All religions have the same principles. Under the sun, every religion is born, grows, develops, multiplies into many sects and dies. This is how it has always been and will always be. Religious principles never die. The religious forms can die, but the religious principles, in other words, the eternal values, never die. They continue. They are robed with new forms. Religion is inherent to life in the same manner that humidity is to water. There are profoundly religious men who do not belong to any religious form. People without religion are conservative and reactionary by nature. Only the religious man achieves the revolution of the dialectic. There is no reason that justifies religious wars like those of Ireland. It is absurd to classify others as unfaithful, heretics, or pagans, because of the simple fact of their not belonging to our religion. The sorcerer, who in the heart of the African jungles exercises his priesthood before the tribe of cannibals, and the aristocratic Christian archbishop who officiates in the Metropolitan Cathedral of London, Paris, or Rome, rest on the same principles, only the religious forms vary. Jesus, the divine Rabbi of Galilee, taught all human beings the path of the truth and the revolution of the dialectic. The truth was made flesh in Jesus and will become flesh in every man who achieves integral revolution. If we study religions, if we carry out a comparative study of religions, we will find in all of them the worship of the Christ. The only thing that varies are the names which are given to the Christ. The divine Rabbi of Galilee has the same attributes of Zeus, Apollo, Krishna, Quetzalcoatl, Lao Tse, Fuji the Chinese Christ, Buddha, etc. One is amazed when one carries out a comparative study of religions. All these sacred religious personages that personify the Christ are born on the 24th of December at 12 o'clock at night. All of these sacred personages are eons of immaculate conceptions. All of them are born by the deed and grace of the Holy Spirit. All of them are born from virgins who are immaculate before childbirth, in childbirth, and after childbirth. The poor and unknown Hebrew woman Mary, mother of the adorable Savior Jesus, the Christ, received the same attributes and cosmic powers of the goddess Isis, Juno, Demeter, Ceres, Vesta, Maya, Adunine, Insobertha, Re, Cybele, Tenansin, etc. All of these feminine deities always represent the Divine Mother, the eternal cosmic feminine. The Christ is always the Son of the Divine Mother, and worship is rendered to her by all the holy religions. Mary is fecundated by the Holy Spirit. Tradition narrates that the third Logos, in the form of a dove, fecundated the immaculate womb of Mary. The dove is always a phallic symbol. Let us remember Peristhera, nymph of the court of Venus, transformed into a dove by love. Among the Chinese, the Christ is Fuji, the Chinese Christ who is miraculously born by the deed and grace of the Holy Spirit. While a virgin named Hoase walked on the riverbank, she placed her foot on the footstep of the great man. Immediately she was affected emotionally, seeing herself surrounded by a marvelous splendor, and her womb conceived. 12 years having transpired, on the 4th day of the 10th moon, at midnight, Fuji was born, thus named in the memory of the river on whose riverbank he was conceived. In ancient Mexico, Christ is Quetzalcoatl, who was the Messiah and transformer of the Toltecs. One day, while Kaimalman was alone with her two sisters, a messenger from heaven appeared to her. The sisters, upon seeing him, die of fright. She, upon hearing from the angel's mouth that she would conceive a boy, instantly conceived Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican Christ, without the work of a male. Among the Japanese, the Christ is Amida, who intercedes before the supreme goddess Tensik-Daitaen, praying for all sinners. Amida, the Japanese Christ of the Shinto religion, is the one who has the powers to open the doors of Gokurat, paradise. The German Eddas mention the Vithristos, the god of their theogony, similar to Jesus, born on the 24th of December at midnight, the same as Odin, Votan, and Belinos. When one studies the Gospel of Krishna, the Hindu Christ, one is astonished upon discovering the same Gospel of Jesus. However, Krishna was born many centuries before Jesus. Devki, the Hindu virgin, conceived Krishna by the deed and grace of the Holy Spirit. The child god Krishna was transported to the stable of Nandan, and the gods and angels came to adore him. The life, passion, and death of Krishna is similar to that of Jesus. It is worthwhile to study all religions. The comparative study of religions leads one to comprehend that all religions conserve the eternal values, that no religion is false, that all are true. All religions talk about the soul, about heaven, hell, etc. The principles are always the same. Among the Romans, hell was the Avernus, among the Greeks, it was the Tartarus, and among the Hindus, the Avicii, etc. Heaven, among the Romans and Greeks, was Olympus. Each religion has its heaven. When the religion of the Roman ended, when it degenerated, the priests became soothsayers, jugglers, etc., but the eternal principles did not die, they were robed with the new religious form of Christianity. The pagan priests, denominated augur, druid, flamen, hierophant, Dionysius, and sacrificer, were rebaptized in Christianity with the sacred titles of the clergy pastors, prelates, pope, anointed, abbot, theologian, etc. The sibyls, vestals, druidesses, popses, deaconesses, monadies, pythonesses, etc. were in Christianity denominated as novices, abbesses, canonesses, superior prelates, reverends, sisters, nuns. The gods, semi-gods, titans, goddesses, sylphids, cyclops, messengers of the gods of ancient religions were rebaptized with the names of Miguels, archangels, seraphim, powers, virtues, thrones, etc. If the gods were adored in antiquity, they are also adored now, except with different names. Religious forms change according to the historical times and the races. Each race needs its special religious form. People need religion. A people without religion are in fact a totally barbarian, cruel, and pitiless people. The fourth unit of reason. The fanatic communists mortally hate anything that has the flavor of divinity. Fanatic materialists believe that with their three-dimensional reasoning they can resolve all the problems of the cosmos, and the worst of the matter is that they do not even know themselves. The God matter of the materialistic gentleman does not withstand an in-depth analysis. Until now, the fanatics of Marxist dialectic have not been able to really demonstrate the existence of matter. During the entire past century and part of the 20th century, the fanatic materialists have wasted their time arguing the already tiresome subject of matter and energy. Much has been said about energy and matter, nonetheless, the latter continue, in spite of all speculations, really being the unknown XY. So what? The funny thing of the matter is that the reactionary followers of the famous dialectic materialism have always tried to define one for the other. It is certainly ridiculous to defame the unknown with the unknown. The poor children kidnapped from Tibet are taught in Peking phrases such as this: matter is that in which the changes called movements are carried out. And movements are those changes which are carried out in matter. This is the identity of the unknown, x equals y, y equals x. The conclusion, it is a vicious circle, ignorance, and absurdity. Who has at some time had in the palm of his hand a piece of matter without any form whatsoever? Who has known matter free of every form? Who has at some time known energy free of the concept of movement? Matter in itself, energy in itself, who has known it? No one has seen matter, no one has seen energy. The human being only perceives phenomena, things, forms, images, etc., but never has he seen the substance of things. The materialistic gentlemen totally ignore everything that a given substance is, and dogmatically call it matter, when in reality they have only seen wood, copper, gold, rock, etc. Really, the so-called matter is a concept that is as abstract as beauty, generosity, courage. No fanatic of dialectic materialism has ever seen the substance of things in itself, as the thing is in itself. We do not deny that they utilize what they dogmatically call matter. The donkey also utilizes the grass for its nourishment without knowing it, but this is not science, this is not wisdom, this is nothing. Do the fanatics of dialectic materialism want to convert all human beings into donkeys? According to what we are seeing, that is so. What else can be expected from those who do not want to know things in themselves? Art. As the human being precipitated himself down the path of involution and degeneration, as he became more and more materialistic, his senses also deteriorated and degenerated. A school of Babylon that was dedicated to the study of everything related to the olfactory sense comes to our memory. They had a motto that said, "Seek the truth in the shades of." Aromas obtained between the moment of the action of frozen cold and the moment of the action in warm decomposition. That school was persecuted and destroyed by a very terrible chief. That chief had very dishonest business matters, and he was soon indirectly accused by those affiliated to that school. The sense of smell, extraordinarily developed, permitted the students of said school to discover many things which were not convenient to government chiefs. There was another very important school in Babylon, the school of painters. This school had as its motto, "Discover and elucidate the truth only by the tonalities which exist between white and black." During that time, those affiliated to such a school could normally utilize, without difficulty, nearly 1,500 shades of the gray color. From the Babylonian period until these sad days in which we live, the human senses have been frighteningly degenerating due to the materialism which Marx justifies in his manner with the cheap sophistry of his dialectic. The I continues after death and is perpetuated in our descendants. The I is complicated with materialistic experiences and becomes robust at the expense of human faculties. As the I has become invigorated throughout the centuries, human faculties have been degenerating more and more each time. The sacred dances were authentic informative books that deliberately transmitted certain transcendental cosmic teachings. The dancing dervishes do not ignore the mutually equilibrated 7 temptations of living organisms. The ancient dancers knew the 7 independent parts of the body and knew very well what the 7 different lines of movement are. The sacred dancers knew very well that each of the 7 lines of movement possesses 7 points of dynamic concentration. The dancers of Babylon, Greece and Egypt did not ignore that all of this crystallized in the whirling atom and on the gigantic planet that dances around its center of cosmic gravitation. If we could invent a machine that imitated with exactness all the movements of the 7 planets of our solar system around the sun, we would discover with amazement the secret of the dancing dervishes. Really, the dancing dervishes imitate to perfection all the movements of the planets around the sun. The sacred dances of the times of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, etc., go still further. They transmitted tremendous cosmic, anthropogenetic, psychobiological, mathematical truths, etc. When the first symptoms of atheism, skepticism, and materialism began to appear in Babylon, the degeneration of the 5 senses accelerated in a frightening manner. It is perfectly demonstrated that we are what we think, that if we think as materialists, we degenerate and fossilize us. Marx committed an unpardonable crime. He took away the spiritual values of humanity. Marxism has unleashed religious persecution. Marxism has precipitated humanity to total degeneration. Materialistic Marxist ideas have been everywhere, in schools and in the home, in the temple and in the office, etc. The artists of each new generation have become true apologists of the materialistic dialectic. Every breath of spirituality has disappeared in ultramodern art. Modern artists no longer know anything of the Law of Seven. They no longer know anything of the cosmic dramas. They no longer know anything about the sacred dances of the ancient mysteries. The tenebrous ones have stolen the theater and the stage. They have miserably profaned it. They have totally prostituted it. The Sabbath, the day of the theater, the day of the mysteries, was very popular in the ancient temples. Marvelous cosmic dramas were then presented. Drama served to transmit valuable teachings to the initiates. By means of drama, different forms of experience of the being and manifestations of the being were transmitted to the initiates. Among the dramas, the most ancient one is that of the cosmic Christ. The initiates knew very well that each of us should become the Christ of said drama if we really aspire to the kingdom of the Superman. The cosmic dramas are based on the Law of Seven. Certain intelligent deviations of such law were always utilized to transmit to the neophyte transcendental teachings. It is well known in music that certain notes can produce happiness in the thinking center, others can produce sadness in the sensitive center, and lastly, others can produce religiosity in the motor center. Really, the old Hierophants never ignored that integral knowledge can only be acquired with the three cerebrums. A single cerebrum cannot give complete information. The sacred dance and cosmic drama, wisely combined with music, serve to transmit to neophytes tremendous archaic teachings of a cosmogenetic, psychobiological, psychochemical, metaphysical type, etc. It is befitting to mention sculpture here. The latter was grandiose in bygone times. The allegorical beings, chiseled on hard rock, reveal that the old masters never ignored the Law of Seven. Let us remember the Sphinx of Giza, in Egypt. It talks to us about the four elements of nature and of the four basic conditions of the Superman. After the Second World War, existentialist philosophy and existentialist art were born. When we have seen existentialist actors on stage, we have arrived at the conclusion that they are true maniacal and perverse sick persons. If Marxism continues to be disseminated, the human being will end up totally losing his five senses, which are in the process of degeneration. It is already proven by observation and experience that the absence of spiritual values produces degeneration. The painting of today, music, sculpture, drama, etc., are nothing but the product of degeneration. The initiates of other times, the sacred female dancers, the true artists of the great times no longer appear on the stage. Now, only sick automatons, degenerated singers, rebels without a cause, etc. appear on the stage. Ultramodern theaters are the antithesis of the sacred theaters of the great mysteries of Egypt, Greece, India, etc. The art of these times is tenebrous. It is the antithesis of light, and modern artists are tenebrous. Surrealistic and Marxist painting, ultramodern sculpture, Afro-Cuban music, and the modern female dancers are the result of human degeneration. The young men and women of the new generations receive by means of the three cerebrums data, which is sufficient to convert them into swindlers, thieves, assassins, bandits, homosexuals, prostitutes, etc. No one does anything to put an end to this bad art, and everything marches towards a final catastrophe due to the lack of a revolution of the dialectic. Materialistic science. On a certain occasion, a materialistic atheist, an enemy of the living eternal God, and a religious man, argued. They argued about the subject of, which was first, the egg or the chicken? One answered, it was the egg, of course, it was the egg. And who laid the egg? Well, the chicken. So, the other one said that it was the chicken. And where did the chicken come from? Well, from the egg. This is a story that never ends. Finally, a little impatient, the religious man said, could you make an egg the way God did it? The materialist answered, yes, I can. Do it, exclaimed the religious man, and the materialist made an egg which was identical to that of a chicken, with its yolk, albumen, and shell. Seeing this, the religious man said, since you made a marvelous egg, it will produce a chicken. Let us place the egg in an incubator in order for it to be born. Agreed, said the materialist, and they placed the egg in the incubator. But the chicken never came out. The sage Mr. Alfonso Herrera, author of plasmogeny, managed to create a cell, but a dead cell which never had life. Grafts are made, a branch from another plant is implanted into another, supposedly to improve the fruits. The Noadales thus want to correct nature. What they do is an absurdity. Grafts do not carry the same natural living force of the megalocosm. Ingested adulterated fruits come to harm the human body from the energetic point of view. However, scientists feel satisfied with their experiments. They do not understand that each tree captures energy, transforms and retransmits it to the fruits. Upon altering the tree, the energies of the megalocosm are altered, and already that fruit is not the same, it is the product of an adultery, and it harms organisms. However, materialistic scientists believe that they know, when really and truly they do not know. They do not only ignore, but what is worse, they ignore that they ignore. Artificial inseminations are made, the famous spermatozoon, the vivifying cells of an organism are extracted, and already because of that, scientists think that they are creating life. They do not realize that they are only utilizing what nature has already made. Let us put on the laboratory table the chemical elements which are needed to fabricate a spermatozoon and an ovum. Let us tell the scientists to make the ovum and the spermatozoon. Would they do it? I say that they would. But would they have life? Could perhaps a living child come out of it? Never ever, because they do not know how to create life. Therefore, with what proofs do they deny the superior or creative intelligences? If they are not even capable of creating the seed of a tree, a seed that can germinate? What is the basis that materialists have to deny the creative intelligences? Why do they pronounce themselves against the eternal? Has any materialistic scientist been able to create life? When? To play with what nature has already made is something easy, but to create life is different. No scientist can do it. Are they creating life when they divide an amoeba into two, separate its parts on a laboratory table, unite it with another piece of microorganism, and they say, Eureka! 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 But they are not capable of creating an amoeba. Where is the science of these materialistic gentlemen? When have they demonstrated that they can replace the divinity? The reality of facts is that they not only ignore, but what is worse, they ignore that they ignore. Facts are what count, and until now they have not demonstrated it. They say that man comes from the monkey. They come out with the theory of the cynocephalus without a tail, the monkey without a tail, and the arboreal men, children of the noeptizoids, etc. But which would then be the missing link? On what day have they found a monkey that is capable of speaking, gifted with speech? It has not appeared until now. These materialistic gentlemen are ridiculous. They are presenting us with suppositions and not facts. Let us measure the volume of the cerebrum of the best of the monkeys, and let us compare it with the cerebrum of a backward man that may be found, for example, in the tribes of Australia. It is obvious that that monkey would not reach the speaking capacity. Are materialists, therefore, not refuting the theories of Darwin himself and his followers? Does man come from the monkey? On what basis do they sustain it? How do they demonstrate it? Until when are we going to wait for the supposed missing link? We want to see that species of monkey speaking like people. It has not appeared, therefore, it is a supposition of a nonsense that has no reality. Why do they speak of things that they do not know? Why so many cheap utopias? Simply because they have their consciousness asleep, because they have never become interested in carrying out a psychological revolution within themselves, and because they lack the practice of sexual superdynamics. The crude reality of facts is that they are hypnotized. Whoever does not practice the teachings of the revolution of the dialectic will fall into the same errors of the materialistic scientists. Materialistic scientists continuously come out with many theories. By way of example, we will mention that theory of the selection of the species. An insignificant mollusk develops, and from it come out other living species through the process of selection until arriving at man. Can they demonstrate this theory? Obviously not. We do not deny that in each species certain selective processes do exist. There are birds, for example, that migrate in specific times. One is amazed to see them all gathered. How strange they become. Then, they pick up flight to cross the ocean and, on the way, they die, only the strongest surviving the struggle. Those that survive the struggle transmit their characteristics to their descendants. This is how the selective law works. There are species that incessantly struggle against marine monsters, and on the basis of so much struggle, they result being strong and transmit their characteristics to their descendants. There are beasts that on the basis of so much struggle become stronger and stronger each time, transmitting their psychological characteristics to their descendants. Never has natural selection been able to present to us a new species upon the stage of existence. Nonetheless, many are those who have given selection the characteristics of a creator. Much has also been said about the protoplasm. From the protoplasm which is submerged in the salty sea since millions of years ago, from that protoplasm it is said that universal life came. Protist materialists make their ignorant followers believe, like themselves, that the psychological development of the intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, comes from the molecular development of the protoplasm and that it marches parallel with the processes of the same. Protists want the consciousness, or however they may want to call it, to be the result of the evolution of the protoplasm throughout the centuries. This is how protists, those who believe that they are gifted with knowledge, believe. Haeckel's atomic monoron, that atom that is submerged there in the aqueous abyss from which O life surged forth, comes to my memory. This is how Haeckel and his followers think something complex that has not had to undergo different cosmic universal processes has not been organized. The reality is that scientists neither know anything about life nor death, nor about where we come from nor where we are going, much less what the objective of existence is. Why? Simply because they have their consciousness asleep, because they have not done the interior revolution of the dialectic, because they are at the level of massive, collective hypnosis due to the lack of integral revolution that we teach in this work. Materialistic science marches on the path of error. It knows nothing about the origin of man and much less about his inner psychology. We do not deny that the law of natural selection has existed, but it has not created anything new. We do not deny that the species vary throughout time, but the variability factors only go into action after the original prototypes have crystallized in the physical world. The original prototypes of any living species previously develops in psychological space. In the superior dimensions of nature, in the superior dimensions that materialistic scientists deny because they do not perceive them, and they do not perceive them because they are psychologically hypnotized. If they were to first come out of the state of hypnosis and then talked, their concepts would be different, but they sleep due to the lack of mental and sexual dynamics. If someone wants to know about the origin of the human being, he has to observe ontogeny. Ontogeny is a recapitulation of phylogeny. What is ontogeny within anthropology? It is the process of development of the fetus within the maternal womb. If we observe the processes of gestation of a mother, we can evince that ontogeny is a recapitulation of phylogeny, which, in turn, is a state of evolution and transformation through which the human race has undergone throughout the centuries. Ontogeny recapitulates these states within the maternal womb. An ontogenic analysis would lead us to the logical conclusion that the human species and the other animal species have resemblance in their origin and come from psychological space, but that matter of natural selection, of the different variants or factors that produce variation in the human race, only go into action after the species, whichever they may be, have physically crystallized. Before physical crystallization, evolving psychological processes exist within the living bosom of nature, which are unknown to Haeckel and his followers, because, in reality, they know nothing about the origin of the human being. How is it possible that materialistic scientists say that certain variations exist in the different types of living species? Whether it be by accident or in a spontaneous manner, is it perhaps not a contradiction? Is it not they themselves who say that this universe is the result of force, matter, and necessity? How is it that they contradict themselves and then talk to us about spontaneous variance in a universe of force and necessity? Is that possible? A universe of force, matter, and necessity does not admit spontaneous or accidental variations. Those variations in the species exist due to something which they themselves do not know. Materialistic science does not only ignore, but what is worse, it ignores that it ignores. Psychoanalytical Gnostic anthropology delves profoundly into the past. This human race, which nowadays populates the face of the earth, is nothing but a race of intellectual animals mistakenly called men. You can become offended if you want, but before this race of intellectual animals existed, Lemurian, Hyperborean, and polar men existed. Intellectual animals are derived from Atlantis. They were born in Atlantis. The real men of Lemuria, in their last days, withdrew from the world scenery. They left their organisms to the superior elements of the animal kingdoms. The race of intellectual animals was preceded by the men who existed in Lemuria, in the Hyperborean continent, and in the northern polar cap, which in that era was situated in the equatorial zone. On what does psychoanalytical Gnostic anthropology base itself to affirm this? Why does it say this? It bases itself not only on all the traditions that come in the books of ancient Egypt, of the land of the Incas, of the land of the Mayas, from Greece, India, Persia, Tibet, etc., but also on the direct investigations of those who have succeeded in awakening consciousness through a psychological revolution. We are delivering through this work all the systems which are needed to awaken consciousness, and when you awaken, you will be able to investigate and verify for yourselves what I affirm in an emphatic manner. But it is necessary to awaken in order to touch, see, hear, feel, and not be a victim of the theories of a Haeckel, Darwin, Huxley, and his followers. 3 races of men existed, but how could you know it when your consciousness is asleep? Those who succeed in awakening will be able to investigate in the Akashic archives of nature. How was the first race? In what manner did it exist? In those times, around 300 millions of years ago, according to the investigations that we have carried out, the protoplasmic men existed, and the earth itself was still protoplasm. It is not that protoplasm of Haeckel and the salty sea and thousands of other foolishness without any confirmation, no. The protoplasmic race is different. A human race floated in the atmosphere. It had still not fallen on the humid earth. How did it reproduce, and what was its origin? This race had evolved and involuted in the superior dimensions of nature and of the cosmos. It finally crystallized on an earth which was also protoplasmic after many evolving processes, surged forth from its original germ located in the chaos, in the Magnus Limbus, in the Iliaster of the world. When that race crystallized, it formed the surface, the nucleus, which could just as well assume gigantic figures as well as reduce itself to a mathematical point. On what do I base myself to affirm this? On the awakened consciousness. Have I evinced it? Yes, I have. And if you accept the doctrine of reincarnation, so much the better. Obviously, I was reincarnated in that race, and since I am awake, I cannot forget the evolving and involuting processes of the same. That is why I give testimony before you, knowing that you are asleep, but I should deposit all those data that you need in order for you to awaken. How did that race multiply? How did they reproduce? Not as Master Blavatsky said, that they did it in an asexual manner, that they did not need sex for that. Such an affirmation is erroneous, because the force of the Mahachohan, the creative energy of the third logos, flows in an overwhelming manner in everything that has been and will be. The type of reproduction was vociferous. It expressed itself in a different sexual form. Organisms divided themselves the way living cells divide. Biology students know well how the organic cell divides. The cytoplasm with a piece of nucleus becomes separated. They do not ignore that. Ever since then, the vociferous process remained in the blood and continues occurring in our cells by the millions. Isn't that true? Who dares to deny it? I present facts. Do you perhaps believe that that cellular process does not have a root, an origin? If you were to think so, it would be absurd, because there is not a cause without an effect and no effect without a cause. Therefore, we have inherited that. From whom? from the men of the first race. The detached organism could continue developing thanks to the fact that it continued capturing, accumulating, protoplasm from the surrounding atmosphere. Later, the Hyperboreans surged forth, of whom Friedrich Nietzsche speaks about. People who lived in those horseshoes that surround the North Pole, country in the north. Have we evinced this? Yes or no? You have not because you are asleep. I have because I am awake. Deny it? I do not deny it. If you consider me crazy, but I have to give testimony no matter what. I have to always say the truth. The Hyperboreans also existed. They were no longer as gelatinous as the protoplasmic men. Upon speaking in this manner, I am not referring to the cellular soul of Haeckel, in the salty sea, nor to the famous atomic monorin, that is Haeckel and his followers with their absurd theories. Now I wish to emphatically refer to that Hyperborean race that was derived from the protoplasmic race. The Hyperboreans were a more psychic race that reproduced by sexuality in the form of budding. Have you seen the corals on the cliffs of the stormy ocean? From one coral comes out another. And from that one, another, and another. There are plants which by means of their sprouts continue multiplying themselves. The same occurred with the Hyperboreans. Certain sprouts that appeared in the father-mother operated the sexual force until that sprout became detached and gave rise to a new child. That was the method of reproduction of the Hyperboreans. In the end, that race became submerged in the bottom of the stormy Pacific Ocean throughout millions of years of evolutions and involutions of this fecund nature. From the bottom of the seas later surged forth a gigantic continent, Lemuria, which covered the entire Pacific Ocean. It was there where, for the first time, the human race rested upon the hard crust of the earth. The Lemurian continent appeared, not through spontaneous generation as Epicurus and his followers believed, nor through natural selection, the theory elevated to the category of a creating God, marvelous rhetoric that has come from the absurd, isn't that so? How did it surge forth? In what manner? As the Arboreans crystallized, their human bodies took up a hard shape. In this manner the Lemurian hermaphrodites appeared. In the same manner that they are symbolized in the gigantic sculptures of Thea, Hidalgo, Mexico. They walked upon the face of the earth. In the beginning, they reproduced by detaching an egg cell from their organism, and this egg cell developed to give origin to a new creature. That is the epoch in which the phallus and the uterus had not yet been formed. That was the epoch in which the lingam yoni were germinating. That was the epoch in which the ovary had not yet developed. The times elapsed in Lemuria, and the reproduction system by germination appeared. Such a system caused astonishment in that epoch. The ovary received a fecundating cell, in other words, a spermatozoon, in such a manner that when that egg became detached from the ovary of a hermaphrodite, it already went previously fecundated. Upon coming to existence, the egg opened up after a certain time of fecundation, and from there came out a new child. That is why the Nawas said, "The children of the third sun transformed themselves into birds," a wise affirmation of the ancient Nawa culture. But once the end of Lemuria came closer, in the third or fourth subrace onwards, human beings divided into opposite sexes. Cooperation was then necessary in order to create. The system of cooperation to create comes from Lemuria. It is clear that an ovarian egg fertilized by a cell is needed. It is only in this manner, in the union of a fertilizing cell with an ovum, that the original cell with the 48 chromosomes can surge forth, which we indisputably carry in our interior and in which the 48 laws of our creation are represented. Chapter 8. The EX Personality and Quantum Theory. The sparkle of the atoms is due to the packets of energy called quanta. In the diamond, the quanta move at half their speed, decreasing their speed in a progressive manner in the air, water, and earth. An atom is like a vibrometer that produces waves with velocities of their own according to their type. The emotional attachment of the disembodied diminishes the velocity of the quanta in such a manner that the ex-personality of the deceased can be accessible to the retina of a living person. Then, the personality of the deceased person rem palpable. The Garcia Pena case. On a certain day I found myself on the 5 de Mayo Street in Mexico City. With an old friend, I greeted him raising my arm and I continued on my way. A few days later I met a relative of my friend and, to my surprise, he told me that Mr. Garcia Pena, the one whom I had greeted, had died 2 months ago. Undoubtedly, this friend's ex-personality, attached to this world in which we live, made itself tangible, repeating the same actions that he was mechanically accustomed to. It is indubitable that a close relationship exists between the energetic and atomic personality and the quanta which possess their own vibratory frequency. The disembodied, due to their emotional attachment to this three-dimensional world, customarily decrease the quantum vibration of their personalities in an unconscious manner, thus making themselves palpable and perceptible. When the quanta are fast, they are not perceived. When they are too slow, they are not perceived either. Normally, the quanta travel at the velocity of light and in a circle. The secret of time is hidden in the atom. The concept of time is negative. No one could demonstrate the velocity of time. It cannot be enclosed in a laboratory. We, between one event and another, place the time concept. The proof is in the great number of different calendars. What decreases the velocity of the quanta is the attitude that we have at a given instant. In spiritualistic meetings, the same phenomena of the quanta occurs. The process of the cosmos is carried out in an eternal now. The rising and setting of the sun is carried out in an eternal instant. We should develop our own way of thinking. From the energetic point of view, each of us is a mathematical point that agrees to serve as a vehicle to specific values, whether they be positive or negative. Image, values, and identity in someone who annihilated the ego are positive. Death ought to be considered as a mathematical subtraction. Reincorporation. Reincorporation is the new principle that explains the incessant incorporation of values in mathematical points. Energy is indestructible. I do not believe that the quanta can be destroyed, but it is possible to manage to transform them. Every man who likes the psychological revolution should reflect on all that the quantum phenomena is, in order to extract from it the cell concept and the evident self-reflection of the being. The study of the quanta can be carried out by the one who lives mental dynamics in his own flesh and that, with it, has emancipated the mind. Superdiscipline. The superdiscipline and perfection of the physical body is achieved by means of naturopathic medicine. When a superdiscipline exists, it is obvious that we will be able to obtain direct wisdom from the archaeological documents. By having a superdiscipline, we will comprehend and accept that we have to take life as a gymnasium, at will. Great triumphs await the one who subjects himself to a superdiscipline. Those who live a superdiscipline will have to be strong in order to bear the solitude of the path. Evident self-reflection. In order to comprehend evident self-reflection, one needs to study the Epistle of James, which is for those who work in the great work, in the revolution of the dialectic. It is necessary for the great work and the psychological work to be supported with faith, because faith is manifested in deeds. The one who knows how to handle the tongue will dominate the body and will dominate others and, thereby, will be marching in an ascending manner in the great work and in the psychological work. As we advance in the practice of these psychological teachings, we should avoid falling into another psychological error, which is that of becoming boastful. We should also not become conceited in order to triumph in the great work and in evident self-reflection. Chapter 9. Every alchemist, Kabbalist, and psychologist should have faith. Faith is not empirical, we have to fabricate it. It is fabricated by studying oneself and experimenting with oneself. The mystery. The Dharmapalas are the terrible lords of strength who have launched themselves against the materialistic aberrations of the Chinese communists. I will personally be in Tibet because great things are gestated in this sacred place. I will be helping the Tibetans to put an end to the traces of abominations that the Chinese have left. Shangri-La is in the 4th dimension and is a city in the Jin state. The Venerable Master Kudhumi is found there. Tibet is very similar to Egypt, and the monks do not ignore the works of mummification. In the past, the Tibetan monks carried their mummies to the volcanic craters where the lamaseries are found. I do not have any type of fear to affirm that I am a Tibetan lama. You may ask yourselves how it is that I am here and there. This is possible by means of the gift of ubiquity. Yes, momentarily I am in the valley of Aditatva, and at the same time, here, in Mexico. In this valley, sacred processions are carried out. The monastery is on the right side of the valley. Before, the monastery used to be in the third dimension. Now, it is submerged in the fourth vertical. In its interior, the building has large halls where objective works are carried out. As a ones, I have a small workroom. The Dharmapalas meet in the monasteries. Patio. The order is formed by 201 members. The superior staff is constituted by 72 Brahmins. This order is the one that governs the destinies of humanity. Tibet has always been invaded by the English and Chinese, but they have always had to leave due to the terrible power of the Dharmapalas. The Avatar. Avatars cannot forget the social matter. That is why Quetzalcoatl manifested himself in two aspects, the social and the psychological. In my case, I have been concerned with these two aspects, human problems, oriented to be solved by means of the revolution of consciousness in a dialectic manner, and the problems of capital and labor, directed towards being solved by means of LACSP. Pascua in Spanish. Experience. They gave him a lance which represented problems. They made him enter a secret sanctuary, and he found the Patriarch St. Augustine in that sanctuary. The Patriarch took a voluminous book from the bookcase and told him, "I will teach you a mantram to make the fire blazes." He opened the book. He lit a brazier. He pronounced the mantram M and the fire blazed. When he came out, he learned to sing the mantram to make the fire blaze. St. Augustine, the Patriarch, returned before the altar of the temple, dressed with the priestly robes, and Master Samael also. They placed a frying pan in their right hand, as though saying, "You have the frying pan held by the handle." They made a great chain. "We will accompany you forming all of this great struggle." In this manner, the White Brotherhood accompanies him. Unfortunately, the little Gnostic brothers have not studied. They have not lived my teaching which I have delivered during so many years to provide them with psychological liberation, and they themselves have wanted to sabotage the great work of the White Brotherhood. Upon delivering the keys of revolutionary psychology and of LACSP, Pascua, we do not want to climb to positions nor live from the national budget. The only thing that we want is to be useful to humanity, to serve by giving psychological norms which I myself have experienced in order for the intellectual animal to achieve integral revolution. The mission of an avatar is not only a religious matter, but it also encompasses the political and psychological matters of nations. The individual and society. Society is the extension of the individual. If the individual is covetous, cruel, pitiless, egotistical, etc., so will society be. It is necessary to be sincere with oneself. Each of us is degenerated, and therefore society has to inevitably be degenerated. This cannot be resolved by the terrible monster of materialism. This can only be resolved by the individual on the basis of his integral revolution. The hour to reflect on our own destiny has arrived. Violence does not resolve anything. Violence can only lead us to failure. We need peace, serenity, reflection, comprehension. The problem of the world is the problem of the individual. Bloody revolutions do not resolve anything. It is only through intelligence that we will resolve the problem of the bottling up of consciousness. It is only by means of intelligence that we can convert the intellectual animal, first into a man, and then into a superman. It is only with the revolution of the dialectic that we can overcome the terrible monster of materialism. Human society is the extension of the individual. If we really want a radical change, if we want a better world, we need to change individually, to change within ourselves, to alter within our own individuality the abominable factors which produce misery and pain in the world. Let us remember that the mass is a sum of individuals. If each individual changes, the mass will inevitably change. It is urgent to put an end to egotism and cultivate Christ-centrism. It is only in this manner that we can make a better world. It is indispensable to eliminate covetousness and the cruelty that each of us carries within. It is only in this manner, by each individual changing, that society will change, because the latter is merely the extension of the individual. There is pain, there is hunger, confusion, but none of this can be eliminated through the absurd procedures of violence. Those who want to transform the world on the basis of revolutions of blood and liquor, or with coups d'état and executions by shootings, are totally mistaken, because violence engenders more violence and hatred, more hatred. We need peace if we want to resolve the problems of humanity. Darkness is not dissolved with blows and with atheism, but rather by bringing the light. Neither is the error gotten rid of by fighting it face to face, but rather by disseminating the truth without having to attack the error. However much the truth advances, that much will the error have to step back. One does not have to resist what is negative, but instead practice the positive unconditionally and teach its advantages through practice. By attacking the error, we will provoke the hatred of those who err. What we need is to disseminate the light of the revolution of the dialectic in order to dissipate the darkness. It is urgent to analyze the fundamental principles of the Marxist dialectic and to demonstrate to the world the tremendous reality that these do not withstand an in-depth analysis and that they are pure cheap sophistry. Let us make light if we want to overcome the darkness. Let us not spill blood. The hour of being comprehensive has arrived. It is necessary to study our own eye if we really love our fellow men. It is indispensable to comprehend that it is only by putting an end to the factors of egotism and cruelty that each of us carries within, that we can create a better world, a world without hunger and fear. Society is the individual. The world is the individual. If the individual fundamentally changes, the world will inevitably change. Consciousness is in serious danger, and it is only by radically transforming ourselves as individuals that we can save ourselves and save humanity. To the consciousness. Sleeping consciousness. How different you would be if you were to awaken. You would know the 7 paths of happiness. The light of your love would shine everywhere. The birds would rejoice within the mystery of your forests. The light of the Spirit would shine, and happy. The elementals would sing for you in chorus. Enlightenment. In order, practice the teachings of the revolution of the dialectic. Begin your integral revolution from this moment. Dedicate time to the oneself, because in this state, as alive as you are, with that tremendous I within, you are a failure. I want you to resolve to radically die in all the levels of the mind. Many complain that they cannot travel in the astral world at will. When one awakens consciousness, astral travel ceases to be a problem. The asleep are not good for anything. In this work of the revolution of the dialectic, I have delivered the science that is needed to achieve the awakening of consciousness. Do not commit the error of reading this book like someone who reads a newspaper. Study it profoundly during many years, live it. Take it into practice. To those who complain of not having achieved enlightenment, I advise patience and serenity. Enlightenment comes to us when we dissolve the pluralized I, when we have truly died in the 49 levels of the subconscious. Those who go around coveting occult powers, those who utilize sex yoga as a pretext to seduce women, are totally mistaken and march in an opposite direction to that of the goals and disciplines that universal Gnosticism establishes. Work in the 3 factors of the revolution of consciousness in an orderly and perfect manner. Do not commit the error of committing adultery and fornicating. Abandon being like a butterfly. Those who live like butterflies going from flower to flower, from school to school are, in reality, sure candidates for the abyss and the second death. Abandon self-justification and self-consideration. Become enemies of yourselves if you really want to radically die. It is only in this manner that you will achieve enlightenment. Depart from radical zero. Abandon mystical pride, megalomania, the tendency to consider yourselves super-transcended. all of you are merely intellectual animals condemned to the pain of living. It becomes urgent and undelayable that you make an inventory of yourselves in order for you to know what you really are. Be humble in order to attain enlightenment, and after having attained it, be more humble yet. Samael Aun Weor.